If your soulmate has been distant lately, pay attention, because something they discovered about the person who came between you may have completely changed the story they were carrying in their heart. And the strange part is, they didn't have to hear it from you. They found out through something they weren't expecting, something that forced them to look back at the past with completely different eyes. For a long time, they may have believed that you were the one who changed, the one who pulled away, the one who stopped caring, or the one who simply decided the connection wasn't worth fighting for. But now, pieces are falling into place. A conversation they once dismissed suddenly sounds different. A message they misunderstood suddenly carries another meaning. A moment where you stayed silent suddenly feels less like rejection and more like protection. And somewhere in the middle of all those memories, they started asking themselves one uncomfortable question: what if I believed the wrong person? That question is becoming impossible for them to ignore. Imagine finding an old photograph you thought you understood, only to notice something in the background that changes the entire story. That's what this realization feels like for them. The person they trusted may not have told them everything. Something may have been exaggerated, hidden, twisted, or deliberately presented from only one side. And now your soulmate is going back through the memories, looking for the moment when the truth first became distorted. They are not simply thinking about what happened between you anymore. They are questioning who influenced the way they understood it. And this is where the emotional shift begins. Because once someone realizes they may have judged the person they cared about through somebody else's story, they cannot easily return to the version of the past they believed before. Something has changed, and they are only beginning to understand how much. Now that the first piece of the truth has reached them, something inside your soulmate has started to unravel. Because the hardest part of discovering what really happened is not realizing that someone interfered. It is realizing that they may have been looking at you through somebody else's story this entire time. And that realization hits differently. It makes them question memories they once felt completely certain about. Suddenly, the moment they thought you were ignoring them doesn't feel the same. The silence they interpreted as rejection starts looking like hesitation, pain, or an attempt to protect yourself from something you didn't know how to explain. The distance they once blamed on your lack of feelings begins to look suspicious. And now they are going backward, not forward. They are replaying conversations in their mind, remembering the exact words people used around them, remembering who warned them about you, remembering who told them to stop trusting what they felt. And the more they remember, the more uncomfortable the truth becomes. Because there is a difference between losing someone because the connection wasn't meant to survive, and losing someone because another person helped create the distance. Your soulmate is beginning to understand that difference now. Imagine building an entire house using a map someone secretly drew incorrectly. Every wall is in the wrong place. Every door opens toward the wrong direction, and you spend years believing the house itself is the problem. Then one day, you find the original map. Suddenly the strange rooms make sense. Suddenly the doors make sense. Suddenly you realize the structure was never what you thought it was. That is what is happening inside your soulmate right now. They are discovering that some of the conclusions they made about you may have been built on information that was incomplete, exaggerated, or intentionally distorted. And this is why their mind keeps returning to you. They are not simply missing you. They are investigating the past emotionally. They are asking questions they were too afraid, too proud, or too distracted to ask before. Why did you become quiet at that exact moment? Why did you stop explaining yourself? Why did your behavior change after certain conversations? Why did you seem hurt when they thought you were angry? Why were there things you seemed to know but never said? Why did someone else always seem to have an explanation whenever something went wrong between you? Those questions are becoming impossible to silence. And perhaps the most painful question of all is the one they don't want to say out loud. What if they were telling me the truth and I was the one who refused to see it? That thought can keep someone awake. Because when you realize you misunderstood another person's heart, you don't just have to reconsider them. You have to reconsider yourself. You have to look at the decisions you made, the words you said, the doors you closed, and the moments when you chose someone else's version of reality over your own experience. Your soulmate may be doing exactly that now. They may be remembering the way you looked at them when you were trying not to show emotion. They may remember moments when you could have fought harder, but chose silence instead. They may remember times when you seemed ready to say something and then stopped. And perhaps now they are realizing that your silence wasn't empty. It was carrying something, pain, confusion, protection, maybe even love that you didn't believe was safe enough to reveal. And this is where the person who came between you becomes important, because your soulmate is beginning to separate what actually happened from what they were told happened. That separation is painful. They may be angry. They may feel betrayed. They may even be asking themselves, why would someone do this to us? But underneath that anger is something much deeper, regret. Because if someone influenced the connection, then your soulmate has to confront the possibility that they helped that influence succeed. They listened. They believed. They reacted. They pulled away. And you were left on the other side of decisions you may never have fully understood. That is why their emotions may feel so complicated right now. One moment they could be angry at the person who interfered, and the next moment they could be angry at themselves. One moment they could want answers, and the next they could be afraid of what those answers will confirm. Imagine standing in front of a locked door you walked away from years ago, only to discover that you were given the wrong key the entire time. You didn't know the door was still there. You didn't know there was another way in. You simply believed the person who told you it was already closed forever. Now imagine finding the correct key in your hand. Would you immediately open the door? Maybe not. You would probably stand there for a moment, remembering everything that happened before you walked away. That hesitation is important. Your soulmate may not immediately rush toward you because discovering the truth doesn't automatically erase fear. It doesn't instantly erase pride. It doesn't erase the consequences of time. But it changes something much more important, the story they tell themselves about you. Before, they could say, "They didn't want me." Now that sentence doesn't feel complete anymore. Before, they could say, "They walked away because they stopped caring." Now they have to ask, what if they walked away because they were hurt by something I didn't understand? Before, they could blame the connection itself. Now they are beginning to question the person who helped shape their perception of it. And once that happens, the past becomes impossible to look at casually. Every old memory becomes evidence. Every unexplained moment becomes a question. Every silence becomes something they want to decode. This is why you may feel that something has shifted, even without direct contact. The emotional story is changing behind the scenes. They are beginning to realize that the version of you they rejected may never have been the real you. It may have been a version created through assumptions, outside influence, incomplete information, and fear. And now that illusion is cracking. The truth is not simply that someone came between you. The deeper truth is that they may have stood between your soulmate and the opportunity to understand you correctly. And once your soulmate fully accepts that, they won't just have to face what that person did. They will have to face what they did with the information they were given. That is where the real emotional reckoning begins. And now we reach the part your soulmate may be finding hardest to escape. Because discovering that someone came between you is one thing, but realizing that they personally helped that situation happen is something completely different. This is where the anger begins turning inward. At first, they may have wanted someone else to blame. It was easier that way. Easier to point toward the person who interfered, the person who twisted the story, the person who planted doubts, the person who made certain things look different than they really were. But eventually, there comes a moment when the excuses stop working. They start remembering the choices they made after hearing those words. They remember believing without asking you. They remember judging without understanding. They remember moments when you were right there, perhaps waiting for them to notice something you couldn't explain, and they still chose the version of the story that someone else handed them. That realization can hurt more than the original separation, because now they have to ask themselves, why didn't I come to you directly? And there may not be an answer that makes them feel better. Maybe pride got in the way, maybe fear did. Maybe they were already confused and simply trusted the person who sounded the most confident. Maybe they wanted an explanation that required less courage than facing what they actually felt for you. Whatever the reason, they are beginning to understand that they had a choice, and that choice had consequences. Imagine standing in front of a mirror after spending years blaming the person behind you for a decision you made. At first, you might refuse to look. You might turn away. You might tell yourself that you were manipulated, that you didn't know, that you were only reacting to what you were told. And some of that may be true. But eventually the mirror asks a harder question. What did you choose to do after you heard it? That is the question your soulmate may be wrestling with now. They cannot change what someone else said, but they can no longer pretend they had no role in what happened afterward. They may be replaying the moments when they could have defended you, but remained silent. The moments when they could have asked you directly, but listened to someone else instead. The moments when they sensed something wasn't right, but ignored that feeling, because accepting it would have required them to question everything. And that is where guilt becomes powerful. Not the kind of guilt that creates a dramatic confession overnight, but the quiet kind that follows someone into ordinary moments. They could be driving somewhere and suddenly remember your face. They could hear a song and remember a conversation. They could see something that reminds them of you and suddenly think, I should have handled that differently. They may even revisit old messages, not because they are simply nostalgic, but because they are searching for evidence that confirms what their heart is now beginning to understand. And perhaps the most painful discovery is that the truth may have been visible all along. Maybe there were signs they dismissed. Maybe your behavior didn't match the story they were given. Maybe you kept showing care in ways they didn't recognize because they were already convinced of another explanation. Now those details are coming back with a completely different meaning. It is almost like watching the same movie again after someone tells you the ending. Suddenly every small detail feels important. Every pause means something. Every look carries a different weight. Every sentence that once seemed ordinary starts sounding like a clue. And that is why your soulmate may be emotionally overwhelmed right now. They are not processing one discovery. They are processing an entirely different interpretation of the past. They may be thinking, did I lose them because I believed someone else? Did I push them away when they were actually trying to protect themselves? How much did they suffer without telling me? Did they think I never cared? These questions can become heavy because there is no easy way to answer them from a distance. And underneath all of them is one truth they may be slowly accepting. They hurt you without fully understanding why. That doesn't mean every mistake was intentional. It doesn't mean they were the only reason things fell apart. But it means they can no longer hide behind the idea that everything simply happened to them. They made choices too. And those choices affected someone they may still care about deeply. There is a particular kind of regret that arrives when you realize you were given a chance to understand someone and didn't take it. It isn't simply missing the person. It's missing the version of the future that might have existed if you had listened sooner. Imagine receiving a letter years after you thought someone had stopped caring, only to discover that every page explains how much they cared but were too hurt to say it. You wouldn't just feel sadness. You would wonder how different everything could have been if you had opened that letter when it first arrived. That is the emotional space your soulmate may be entering now. They are wondering about the conversations that never happened, the apologies that were never given, the questions that were never asked, and the truth that was never allowed to breathe between you. But there is something else happening beneath the guilt. Their heart is beginning to recognize something their mind spent a long time denying. The connection mattered. You mattered. And if you didn't matter, they wouldn't be feeling this much conflict now. They wouldn't need to revisit the past. They wouldn't care whether the story was true. They wouldn't be disturbed by what they discovered. Indifference doesn't investigate. Indifference doesn't replay memories at midnight. Indifference doesn't ask, what if? Something inside them still cares enough to want the truth. And that is why this moment is so important. They are no longer simply angry at the person who came between you. They are beginning to face themselves. They are beginning to understand the weight of their own choices. They may not know yet what they will do with that realization, but they can no longer comfortably live inside the old story. The truth has entered the room, and once truth enters, pretending becomes exhausting. They can avoid you. They can stay silent. They can delay the conversation. They can tell themselves they need more time, but they cannot unknow what they now know. And sooner or later they will have to decide whether they are willing to keep protecting the past or finally become honest about what really happened between you. And this is where everything becomes even more emotional. Because after the anger, after the confusion, after the guilt, your soulmate is beginning to face something they may have spent a long time avoiding. The truth about what they still feel for you. Discovering what happened with the person who came between you didn't simply make them question the past. It made them question their own heart. Because if they truly stopped caring, why does this revelation affect them so deeply? Why are old memories suddenly becoming louder? Why does your name still carry a feeling they cannot explain? Why are they suddenly remembering the little things they thought they had forgotten? This is the part they cannot easily reason their way through. They may have convinced themselves that enough time had passed, that the distance had changed everything, that they had moved on, or that whatever existed between you was simply something they needed to leave behind. But now the truth has disturbed that carefully constructed conclusion. Imagine a room inside someone's heart that they locked years ago because opening the door hurt too much. They stopped visiting it. They stopped talking about it. They convinced themselves that nothing important was inside. Then one day they find the key again. They open the door just slightly, and suddenly everything they thought they buried is still there. That's what this realization can feel like for your soulmate. The feelings may not have disappeared. They may have simply been buried underneath disappointment, misunderstanding, pride, and everything they were told to believe. And now that those layers are beginning to fall away, the emotions underneath are becoming visible again. They may be asking themselves questions they never expected to ask. Why do I still think about them? Why does their absence still affect me? Why does knowing the truth make me want to hear their voice? Why does it feel like something unfinished is suddenly coming back to life? These questions are not random. They are signs of an internal confrontation. Your soulmate is beginning to separate what they were taught to feel from what they actually felt. There is a difference between deciding to move on and genuinely becoming emotionally free from someone. Sometimes a person can walk away physically while carrying the connection internally for much longer than they admit. They can start new routines, meet new people, stay busy, laugh, continue their life, and still have one quiet place in their mind where your memory remains untouched. And when the truth about what happened finally appears, that hidden place can suddenly become impossible to ignore. They may remember the way you looked at them during a difficult moment. They may remember how you made them feel understood without needing many words. They may remember conversations that seemed ordinary at the time, but now feel incredibly significant. They may remember the moments when the connection felt effortless, when neither of you needed to explain why being together felt natural. And now they are comparing those real experiences with the story someone else gave them. That comparison is powerful because memories don't always disappear just because someone decides they should. Imagine trying to erase writing from a page, only to discover that the pressure of the words left marks underneath. You can remove the ink, but the impression remains. That's what some connections become. They may not be visible every day, but they leave an imprint. And your soulmate may be realizing that the imprint you left never actually disappeared. What changed was their willingness to look at it. This is also why they may seem hesitant. If they are beginning to feel everything again, they may not immediately act. They could be afraid Afraid that you no longer care. Afraid that too much time has passed. Afraid you won't believe them. Afraid they will have to explain why they listened to someone else. Afraid that reaching out will force them to confront consequences they cannot undo. And perhaps most of all, they may be afraid that you have already healed from the pain they helped create. That possibility can be both beautiful and terrifying for someone who is finally waking up to reality. Because what if the person they lost is no longer waiting? What if you learn to live without the answers they once refused to give you? What if you no longer need the apology they are finally ready to offer? Those thoughts can create a very different kind of urgency inside them. They are beginning to understand that discovering the truth does not automatically restore the past. It simply gives them a chance to stop lying to themselves about it. And that may be the most important change happening right now. They are becoming honest. Honest about the fact that the connection mattered. Honest about the fact that they still wonder about you. Honest about the fact that the person who came between you may have influenced choices they now regret. Honest about the fact that walking away did not necessarily mean their heart walked away with them. There is a quote that fits this moment perfectly. You can convince your mind to leave long before your heart understands why it stayed. Your soulmate may finally be understanding that. They may have spent months or years trying to explain away the feelings, but explanations become harder when the truth begins connecting every missing piece. And maybe that is why certain memories have returned so suddenly. Maybe that is why they find themselves wondering what you would say if they told you everything. Maybe that is why they are imagining the conversation they never had. I didn't know the whole truth. I believed something that wasn't complete. I should have asked you. I still care. These are difficult words for anyone to admit, especially when pride has been protecting them for so long. But pride becomes weaker when reality becomes stronger. Your soulmate is reaching that point now. They are beginning to understand that the biggest thing they lost may not have been a relationship. It may have been the opportunity to experience the connection without someone else's interference. And once that realization settles into the heart, it changes everything. They are no longer simply looking backward because they miss you. They are looking backward because they finally understand that the story they accepted may never have been the whole story. And now, whether they are ready or not, they are standing at the edge of a truth they can no longer escape. Whatever they felt for you was never as finished as they convinced themselves it was. And now we arrive at the truth your soulmate can no longer keep running from. Because after everything they have discovered, everything they have remembered, and everything they have finally understood about the person who came between you, there is one reality that keeps standing in front of them no matter how many times they try to look away. They can blame the circumstances. They can blame the timing. They can blame the misunderstandings. They can blame the person who interfered. They can even blame themselves. But underneath all of those explanations is something much simpler and much harder to accept. What happened between you mattered, and the story they believed about it was never the complete truth. That realization changes the entire emotional landscape. Suddenly the distance between you doesn't feel like a clean ending anymore. It feels like an unfinished chapter that was closed before both people had the chance to speak honestly. And your soulmate is beginning to understand that. They may be sitting with memories that once felt ordinary and realizing how much meaning was hidden inside them. They may remember the last conversation, the last look, the moment the energy changed, the moment one of you pulled away, and now they are asking themselves what they should have asked back then. What was really happening? What were they trying to tell me? Why did I believe someone else's version before hearing theirs? These questions are no longer coming from curiosity. They are coming from realization. Imagine two people standing on opposite sides of a wall, both believing the other person chose to walk away. Years later, they discover the wall wasn't built by either of them. It was built from rumors, assumptions, fear, and someone else's influence. Suddenly, the silence between them has a completely different meaning. That is the kind of truth your soulmate may be confronting now. They are realizing that perhaps you weren't rejecting them. Perhaps you were protecting yourself. Perhaps you weren't losing interest. Perhaps you were tired of fighting a story you didn't even know was being told about you. Perhaps you weren't cold. Perhaps you were hurt. And the more they understand, the harder it becomes for them to maintain the old version of events. This is why their emotions may feel so complicated. Part of them may want to reach toward you. Another part may be afraid of what happens if they do. Because facing reality also means facing consequences. They may have to admit that they were wrong. They may have to acknowledge that someone they trusted influenced their perception. They may have to accept that you suffered in silence while they were believing something completely different. And perhaps the hardest thing of all is realizing that an apology cannot erase time. An explanation cannot recreate every lost moment. A confession cannot automatically restore the trust that was damaged. This is where true emotional maturity begins, because facing reality is not the same as demanding that everything go back to the way it was. Your soulmate is slowly learning that. They are beginning to understand that if they ever approach you again, they cannot come with excuses. They cannot simply say, "I missed you," and expect the past to disappear. They would have to come with honesty. They would have to acknowledge what happened. They would have to admit what they misunderstood. They would have to explain what they discovered and why it changed everything. And perhaps that is why they have been quieter than you expected. Sometimes silence isn't a lack of feeling. Sometimes silence is the moment someone is trying to gather enough courage to face what they already know. Think about the difference between someone who doesn't care and someone who cares but doesn't know how to repair what was broken. The first person moves forward without looking back. The second person keeps returning to the same questions. They replay memories. They imagine conversations. They wonder what you would say. They think about whether you would even listen. And if your soulmate is doing that now, the truth is becoming heavier than the illusion ever was. They may also be confronting something they never expected. You may have changed. The version of you they remember may not be the person standing in your life today. You may have learned how to live without their presence. You may have stopped waiting for explanations. You may have healed parts of yourself that once desperately wanted answers. And that possibility can force them to understand that discovering the truth doesn't guarantee they get another chance. The truth gives them clarity, not entitlement. It gives them the opportunity to be honest, not the right to rewrite your experience. That distinction matters, because perhaps the greatest lesson in this entire situation is that love cannot survive indefinitely on assumptions. At some point, people have to stop listening to outside voices and start listening to what is actually true between them. And your soulmate may finally be reaching that point. They are beginning to understand that the person who came between you may have influenced the separation, but the deeper responsibility now belongs to the person holding the truth. What will they do with it? Will they continue protecting their pride? Will they stay silent because an apology feels uncomfortable? Will they pretend they never discovered what they discovered? Or will they finally become brave enough to acknowledge what happened? That decision may take time. But the internal shift has already happened. They cannot return to the version of themselves who knew nothing. They cannot unknow what they now know. They cannot hear the old story in the same way anymore. Imagine a window that has been covered for years by a heavy curtain. One day, someone pulls the curtain aside and sunlight enters the room. You can close the curtain again, but you can never honestly say the room is dark because you don't know there is light outside. That is what truth does. Once it enters, pretending becomes a choice. And your soulmate is now standing in that light. They may still be confused. They may still be afraid. They may still need time. But they are seeing something they couldn't see before. They are seeing you differently. They are seeing themselves differently. And they are seeing the person who came between you differently. The story has changed because the information has changed. And perhaps the most powerful realization they are carrying is this: I thought I lost them because they stopped caring. Maybe I lost them because I never understood what was really happening. That sentence can change everything inside a person's heart. Because now the past isn't simply something they regret. It becomes something they finally understand. And understanding can be painful, but it can also be the beginning of honesty. So if you have been wondering whether your soulmate ever realized what truly happened, understand this: the most important part may not be whether they immediately return, call, message, or confess everything. The important part is that the illusion has been broken. The person who came between you no longer controls the entire story inside their mind. Your soulmate now has another version of reality to consider, and this time they are looking at it with their own eyes. They are finally asking the questions they should have asked before. They are finally recognizing the feelings they tried to bury. They are finally seeing the cost of believing someone else's version of you. And they are finally facing the reality that perhaps the connection was never as finished as they told themselves it was. Maybe the chapter didn't end because the love disappeared. Maybe it ended because the truth was buried underneath too many voices. But now that truth has surfaced. And whatever happens next, one thing has already changed permanently. They can no longer pretend they don't know. The past has been exposed for what it was. The illusion has begun to fall apart, and the person who once stood between you no longer has the same power over the story. Your soulmate has a choice now. They can protect their pride, or they can protect the truth. They can keep hiding behind what happened, or they can finally face it. And if they choose honesty, the next conversation between you may not sound anything like the conversations you had before. Because this time, they won't be speaking from someone else's story. They'll be speaking from what they finally discovered for themselves.